Sure. No sé.
Good morning. Buenos días a todos y gracias por estar aquí. Mi nombre es Elizabeth Porras Jansen y I am the Evolucíon committee host for Rito Martinez, who is going to be our speaker during this session. Leadership, transformation, and emotional intelligence. We can do more than survive. So I encourage you to share your ideas, your comments on the chat while we are talking. So I'm going to read his bio because he has so many interesting things to say and I don't want to miss anything. Rito Martinez is a giver whose own deep commitment to personal development through learning, self-reflection, and an embrace of the process, fuel his passion to support the development of others. As Vice President of Programs for the Search Institute, Rito is responsible for setting the vision and direction for the content of the Search Fellowship, as well as the design of the Search core curriculum. Rito is a proud alumnus of Chicago Public Schools. Growing up in Little Village, a working-class neighborhood on the southwest side of Chicago, he overcame significant challenges stemmed from systematic and institutional development to become an award-winning educator. Congratulations, Rito. As a teacher, Rito constantly pushed his students to explore self-identity and culture as to find their purpose. He also helped students unpack the impact of low expectations and demand that they form an intellectual identity. His work on creating culturally relevant curricula, as well as the relationship he formed with his students, led to his receiving the Golden Apple Award for Teaching Excellence. After 12 years as a classroom teacher, Rito returned to his community to support a grassroots movement to open a new high school in Little Village. In 2004, he was founding principal of Social Justice High School, an innovative small school that was birthed from a community grassroots struggle that culminated in 19-day hunger strike. Rito worked incessantly to create a powerful high school culture that would address the political and racial division of North and South Lawndale. Social Justice High School became a vibrant school where Black and Latino students actively engage in civil and social justice projects to address systematic issues to inequity of their community. By the time he left in 2009, he forged significant and meaningful partnerships with community organizations, universities, and foundations in order to implement successful school-wide programs. As he transformed from being a classroom teacher to being a principal, Rito made a critical realization. He had to transfer his love of teaching high school students to a love of teaching and developing adults. Rito's expertise in adult learning, design, leadership development, and executive coaching has transformed his work for the past 10 years. He has discovered that other African Americans and Latino leaders have similar transformative experiences as children. Rito believes that every leadership journey features peaks and valleys that inform one's ever-evolving leadership identity. For leaders of color, that journey is over time centered on self-doubt, a fear of failure, and a fear of disappointment oneself or others. When left unexamined, this inner voice diminishes a leader's effectiveness and impact. For Black and Brown leaders, it is imperative that they examine issues of identity, race, and ethnicity as a means of understanding both their strength and inherent genesis. Rito is deeply committed to impacting African American and Latino communities by supporting and developing the leaders who serve them. He has been able to integrate his identity, his own experience, healing, and his values driving work of liberation as a racial healer practitioner with TRHT in Chicago. The overcomes for today's sessions are grounded ourselves in the elements that make up emotional intelligence, reflect on our own journey, and develop with EQ, make connections to how EQ can empower us to lead for transformation, and explore why transformational leadership in EQ is how we need to lead during this time of crisis and double national pandemic, COVID, and systematic oppression and racism. So please welcome Mr. Rito Moreno. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for such a warm introduction. Gracias, muchísimas gracias por la introducción. I needed to sort of quiet myself and actually listen to that and recall and reflect on the path and journey that I have been in. It's a discipline to do that. It's also wonderful to see so many close friends in the breakout room. So shout out to George Fuller and Eric Wilkinson and Ernesto Saldivar and AJ De Leon. Please, in your chat, drop in your name, the city that you're in. Would love to welcome you. Michael Meany, welcome. Stephen Lakis, welcome. And just, again, really excited to share a little bit of time with all of you this morning. Bienvenidos a todos, con mucho amor, a lot of love from Chicago. Again, emotional intelligence and helping us lead in transformation. Charles King, good morning. Good to see you. Shelby, welcome. Rosana from Kansas City, welcome. Katia, welcome as well from Providence, Rhode Island. Fantastic. Sharon Hayes is here. Justin Ramirez from KC. Rick Malone from KC as well. Welcome, everyone. Keep putting in your names. I'll keep shouting all of you out. Etta Garcia, Brookside Charter, KCMO is here as well. That's wonderful. Welcome, everyone. AJ's here as well. Thank you, AJ. Again, all of this is basically just a reminder. Edwin Perez from Baltimore, welcome, Edwin. We have known and heard about the importance of emotional intelligence, or EQ, and so to me, I hope this is just sort of a reminder and an opportunity to reflect our own personal journey on continuing to develop our emotional intelligence. It's a practice. It's a discipline. We never arrive as experts. It is a constant journey. So let's give a shout out to Diana Martinez from Head Start Family Conservancy, Jim Henman, Guadalupe Center, Lisa Garcia, again, Ernesto. Again, welcome, everyone. So again, these are just an opportunity for all of us to sort of ground ourselves, remind ourselves of our journey and our evolution around emotional intelligence. So one of the things that I have learned in my journey is that in order to lead transformation through a lens of transformation, in order to lead through a lens of supporting and elevating and transforming the lives of others, including the life of myself, it's both a healing process, it is a discipline and a decision, and it's also a commitment. And so my personal value in which I lead is really central on radical love, or love as resistance. I think love is probably the most powerful tool that we can have at our disposal to dismantle the darkness of systemic racism, dismantle the systems that harm us, and address the issues that are harming our community. I think we could talk about how we engage students and all the systems and standards and data, but I think the power of love is extremely important in how they see themselves and how they're engaging as learners and are forming their own identity. And so love has always been at the center of how I've approached learning, I have approached my own journey of healing, and how I engage in transformational relationships. So I want to give all of you just a couple of minutes to reflect on this quote. And the quote says, "Power without love is reckless and abusive, and love without power is sentimental and anemic." So how does love show up in your leadership? How does love show up in the way that you engage with communities that you serve? And how is love central to the work of justice that we must continue to forge ahead, especially during this time of crisis, of national crisis, through these double pandemics? So just give yourself a minute to reflect and jot down some reflections around what comes up for you, what resonates, what questions do you have regarding this quote. And then to build community, please, anything that you have and you're willing to share, of course, by invitation, put into the chat. Thank you for that. So again, just a quick sort of summary and definition of emotional intelligence. Again, these are just reminders. All of us know and are aware of what EQ is and how it shows up. We've all taken, leadership programs and seminars and workshops. So this is just a quick refresher. Emotional intelligence really sits between the analytical and the emotional. It is the other side of our minds and how we do this work. All the research accounts that all the success, career success that we have, 80% of it is attributed to emotional intelligence and how we engage with our teams, how we lead others, how we develop others, and our level of self-awareness in that process. It's not something you could naturally teach or get a degree in, but it's a lifelong commitment to continue to work on focusing inward and self. And then also research shows that emotional intelligence is often twice as important as ingredients of outstanding performance, such as cognitive ability and technical skills. So I think the iceberg does a really great illustration of how EQ is so important. IQ is the tip of the iceberg, balance, performance, decision-making, leadership. And then the EQ is so critical: self-awareness, motivation, self-management, self-regulation, social skills, empathy, transformation, love, justice. All that is a part of EQ. So one of the most important components of emotional intelligence is our ability to be self-aware. And again, this is a skill, this is a practice, this is a discipline. This is something that we must constantly be committed to doing that internal work. So first and foremost, in order to do that, we must absolutely have to understand and define who we are. Who are we as leaders of color? Who are we as Latinos, as as Mexicanos, as Puerto Ricanos, as Afro Latinos, as hetero, cisgendered man that I am? How does that impact how I lead? And really fully understanding our multiple identities of who we are. And so really doing that work of self-awareness and discovery is critical. We must integrate our intellect and our emotional intelligence. We can't separate those or compartmentalize those. We must integrate them and do the work of integration constantly and continually, so that we show up whole, show up in our power, show up authentically, and fully integrated as leaders. Again, we must have a deep understanding of our masculine and feminine energy and privilege. I have to work on all the time. If I want to dismantle and interrupt patriarchy, I must understand the advantages that I have, again, as a cis hetero Latino man, and recognize those advantages and recognize the work that I must do in order to both disrupt the patriarchy and systems that harm, and at the same time understand how I show up in situations and the privileges that I have. And so doing that internal work is critically important. And also knowing that we as human beings have both energies, the masculine and the feminine energy, and how we must be in balance even with ourselves. And really uncovering and discovering, how sometimes culture may reinforce negative understandings of our feminine and masculine energy, and all the work that we must do to break down and disrupt machismo and the impacts that it has even in our households. We must display compassion and vulnerability as strength. Vulnerability is a superpower, but it's again something that I've worked incessantly to lead with. And if we do that, then our decisions will be decisive. Our decisions will be centered on values, and our authority will not come from power, but our authority will come from a set of values and a self-awareness that can be transformational. And so we must also understand that we're navigating and understanding our identities within a very specific context. And that context is white body supremacy culture that exists all around us, that defines what leadership is from a lens of a white male and the privileges that they wield. And so we must understand how we're navigating that, how it's impacting us, and constantly also reflect and understand those impacts. Because we want to show up powerfully. And in order to show up powerfully, we must do that internal work and not constantly show up wearing a mask, because those masks are absolutely heavy. Oftentimes those masks can grow on our face and we could forget and lose ourselves and lose our identity, and at the same time lose our power. And we know that when we're putting on those masks to navigate these systems, it also harms us, harms our spirit, it harms who we are. And then eventually we will hit a breaking point where we have been harmed, traumatized by navigating these complex systems, and we lose who we are. And so doing this work and integrating who we are, our identity, especially today through the lens of emotional intelligence, can free us from taking off that mask and showing up authentically and powerfully. So the benefits and power of really integrating these elements of emotional intelligence can have a powerful impact in how we lead, a powerful impact in the lives of others. And so leading with emotional intelligence, it can really bring people together and reduce isolation and individualism, and how we are working and engaging in the systems, complex systems in which we're leading. It can break down silos and dismantle hierarchy. It can create a culture of equity. And then what I have prescribed constantly, especially within the last 10 years of all of the work that I have done, is that I insist on moving us from transactional relationships to transformational relationships, so that we could actually be in community, see each other's humanity, and know that what we give and what we receive can continue to transform both the work, our outcomes, and also ourselves. So let's take some time to sort of reflect on those first 3 slides, and also sort of reflect and apply this quote, one of my favorite quotes. Says, knowing others is intelligence. Knowing yourself is true wisdom. Mastering others is strength. Mastering yourself is true power. So take a minute to sort of write down what resonates with you regarding this quote, regarding your own journey around who you are as a leader, who your own journey in terms of understanding self, in terms of integrating emotional intelligence and intellectual intelligence, and also understanding how you're navigating issues of gender, issues of culture, issues of race through your leadership. So just take a minute to reflect and jot down things that are coming up for you, your own reflections, your own insights, your own journey, and then see where those reflections fall within the lines of this quote. So take a minute to do that. Great, thank you. So here are 3 extremely important actual tasks, actual elements that we could work intentionally on to continue to strengthen and develop our emotional intelligence. And the first one is probably the most important one that I have been focusing on and working on consistently, constantly, with a lot of intentionality. And that one is self-regulation. Self-regulation is the ability to manage your own emotions, the ability to hold space for others, the ability to empower to remove judgment and acknowledge people's humanity, and then the ability to also hold multiple emotions and multiple ideas and multiple issues of dissonance in place and allow those to sit comfortably within you. So self-regulation is absolutely critical that we're constantly working on to understand how we are improving and sustaining and deepening this work of self-regulation. One of the examples that I have there in the image that reflects my work in self-regulation is my partnership with my partner, Leti. And I remember the first couple of years that we were married, and she would get upset for some reason. Oftentimes I didn't know the reason why she was upset. And she would start crying, and she would cry. And I could not regulate that. And I wanted to control. My response was to control. 1, understand why she was crying. And 2, understand what upset her, to see if I could fix it and have her stop crying. Because it would produce such anxiety, helplessness, And then sometimes if I was the reason why she was upset or why she was crying, then it would produce this defensiveness in me. And I would center myself in that conflict instead of really acknowledging and seeing her, and allowing her to basically do what she needed to do to process and understand that conflict and what just occurred. And so my ability not just to let her, to be supportive, not disconnect, but be supportive, be still, allow her to cry, allow her to process her emotions, validate those emotions, validate the fact that she was crying without interjecting my emotional response, quieting my emotional response, holding both of those together, being firmly present for her, and allowing that space was critical in my ability to grow in my emotional intelligence. And so oftentimes the spaces that we have in our own families, in our own relationships, in those intimate relationships with our partners, with our children, with our parents, with those family members that trigger us, are really amazing opportunities for us to reflect and practice on this element of self-regulation that's so connected to emotional intelligence. And so I share that with you as an example of the work that I have been doing on self-regulation, and also the work that I'm doing to honor my partner, see my partner more fully, and also understand my identity as a man in that relationship, in that navigation of conflict and reconciliation, because they're all interconnected. The second one is the power and ability to powerfully be present and listen. And I'm talking, and I'm going to emphasize this: listening is an absolute skill that we must invest in. Like, we have to listen not just with our ears, we have to listen with our eyes, with our heart, with our mind. We have to listen with our entire body. We have to listen to what is being said and what is not being said. We have to maximize the moment and be present. And we must do that with our loved ones first and foremost. And we also must do that as leaders. Oftentimes we are listening to solve, we are listening to interject, we are listening to interrupt, we are listening to fix, and we're not being present. And so the practice and discipline of listening, constructivist listening, listening for transformation, is a critical skill. And again, I have an image of a child there. I have been blessed in my life to have my middle son, Salvador, or Chava. He chose us as his parents. I'm firmly aware that he chose us as his parents. And we were surprised when he came to us and he was born to have special needs. He has Down syndrome and is nonverbal. So he has a hard time speaking. He doesn't speak, but he communicates so powerfully. And he has taught me so deeply the importance of listening to him, even though he's not speaking a language, but he is speaking with his heart, with his emotions, with his spirit, with his entire body, and is able to communicate powerfully. And I'm constantly reminded when I get really busy and he's trying to say something to me, that kicks in, boom. Be present, focus, listen to him, honor him, see him. And that I've received that gift that he has brought, because again, his love is transformational for me and so healing. So I must honor him with that. And so again, another example of the work that I continue to do around this other element of emotional intelligence, which is the power of listening. And then lastly is the power of empathy. This is the ability to identify and understand the wants, the needs, and viewpoints of those around you, and to invite and engage in transformational relationships. If we are able to do these things and continuing to work with these in these areas of our development, and this is how we lead front and center, then we will create a collectivist culture and a collectivist community that will be self-sustaining, so that we can do more than survive, especially during this time of crisis and in these double pandemics. So take another minute to identify an area of emotional intelligence that I just mentioned: self-regulation, the power of listening and being present, and empathy. And then jot down in your journal, or in wherever space you're in, or in notes on your phone, what in the past has interfered with your ability to lead more fully with emotional intelligence. And then what do you commit moving forward? What is one area that you will commit to sort of continue to do that work and discipline of continuing to build your practice of leading in a way of transformation, not only for those that you love, but those that you serve, but also leading for transformation, for your own transformation and for your own healing. And so just take a minute to jot down and reflect one area that you commit to continue to doing more work as we wrap up. Great, thank you. So just quickly, here are some barriers that oftentimes get in the way of us being able to lead in a way that is transformational. Lead with love, lead with emotional intelligence. And again, just really quickly, these are probably things that you all know. But we really must insist that this is a me and you and us, a collectivist perspective of how we do this work, and not a me versus you. Like, we have to break those paradigms and those patterns of how we engage. We have to constantly work with our issues of judgment and bias, especially racial bias, gender bias, our ableness, a bias of those who are able-bodied, a bias of age as well, and continuing to do that work. Then this is probably the most important: comparison. We often fall into, I wish we were more like this, I wish we were more like that, I wish we had more of this or more of that. Comparison is the thief of joy. Really try to refrain from comparison and not being present. And then, constantly being aware of how we're navigating and saying no to aspects of white supremacy culture that show up in our leadership: competition, individualism, meritocracy, urgency, perfectionism, performance. Those are all elements of white supremacy culture that undermine how we could lead in transformational ways. And just know that leading with vulnerability, leading with this power of love, leading with transformational relationships really makes us supremely qualified to continue to impact the communities of color which we serve. I love this quote by Brene Brown: "Vulnerability sounds like truth and feels like courage, but truth and courage aren't always comfortable or easy, but they are never weaknesses." So as we move forward, again, do this work centered on emotional intelligence, moving from the transactional to the transformational, making powerful, deep connections, purposeful, mutual, supportive, long-lasting relationships is what will sustain us, especially during these times. And then we will do more than survive, because we will create a collectivist community of support, resiliency, and love with all those that we engage in. So tons of gratitude to all of you for being a part of this morning's breakout session and being part of Evolucíon. Lots of love to Edgar and his amazing team for putting this together. My email is there. Please reach out if there's anything that you need, any way that I can continue to support your work or the work of your organizations. I'm going to stop sharing my screen to see if there's any final questions in the chat. Thank you, Edwin. Thank you, Diana. I think we have time for one question if anybody has any questions. I love Ernesto. Absolutely. I love Gloria's quote. I changed myself. I changed the world. Thank you so much. Yomi, hermana. Thank you, Carla. Thank you, Shelby. Thank you, brother George. Love you, man. Justin, thank you so much. Absolutely. My pleasure to be in community with all of you this morning. Grateful for you too, AJ. Love you. Absolutely, Stephen. It's a discipline. Self-reflection and doing the internal work is so needed. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Rito, for sharing today your experiences with us. Thank you for your insight. We are navigating in our own journey to grow in our self-understanding and growing in our emotional intelligence. And I'm sure that everyone here today with us agree that this presentation is a summary of how truly is important to internalize love into this process of transformation by listening and empathize with others, so we can ourselves grow as teachers and as members of this community. So thank you for all those reminders in our lives.
Great, thank you so much. It was a pleasure and honor to be in community with all of you. Muchísimas gracias. Les mando un fuerte saludo. Hay que seguir en la lucha para cambiar y seguir sirviendo a nuestras comunidades que nos necesitan, pero también necesitamos a nuestras comunidades también para estar en una relación con equidad y libertad y esperanza para todos.
Okay, thank you everybody for being here. And so we're going to go with our other members of the Latinx committee so we can close up our conference. So thank you everybody for being here today with us. Adiós. Feliz día.
Gracias.